Welcome everybody to the website evaluation workshop. My name is Amanda Bezet and I am one of the reference librarians here at the NCU Library. Now we do have a number of learning objectives today that are located in your workshop outline. If you do not have your workshop outline in front of you, that's certainly okay. I'd like to show you where you can access that at any point. So you can go to the Research Help drop-down menu and click on Learn the Library. From here, you're going to click on the Library Workshop videos in order to access the full-length video recordings of all of our library's workshops, or you can navigate to the outlines as well as the transcripts. So I'll click on the outlines, and then if you need to return to the website evaluation outline, you will see that here. Following the presentation, we do have a recommended workshop activity that you can do to sort of test your own knowledge with evaluating websites. So that's also accessible here as well as from within the outline. Now, if you are watching this as a recorded session, you can always provide us with feedback by clicking on the Library Workshop videos and then clicking the Library Workshop feedback survey. So we always welcome any comments about our workshops and our workshop recordings. That helps us to improve our sessions going forward. If you are attending this live, you will be receiving an email with a link to this survey as well. So just let us know if it helped you. Okay, so of course this is the website evaluation workshop. This will provide you with information on how to evaluate websites for use in scholarly research. It will provide you with the knowledge to avoid being misled by inaccurate, inauthentic, or otherwise unscholarly websites. Upon completion of this workshop, you will know how to locate the library's website evaluation page within the Research Process Guide, use an internet search engine to locate scholarly websites, properly evaluate websites to determine if they are appropriate to use in scholarly research, and finally, fact-check information found on websites to determine accuracy. So we are going to start out by going back to the library's homepage, and I'm going to go to the Research Help drop-down menu and click on the Research Process. The research process is a thorough overview of the research process, starting with finding a research topic and going down to organizing your research and then possibly publishing your scholarly research. And of course, it has everything in between, including a section on website evaluation. So this is the section of the research process that this particular workshop will correspond to. So this is kind of a broad overview of what we are going to cover today. And of course, we have that recorded session there and some additional information that you can review. Again, if you wanted to follow up this session with the activity, you will have a link to that activity here as well. In addition to this section on website evaluation, under determining information needs, we have a more general guide on evaluating information. So whereas this website evaluation page pertains specifically to online sources, you may also want to review this page, Evaluating Information, to get that broad overview of what you should be looking for in terms of evaluating any types of resources, even scholarly research that comes from the NCU library. So of course, you would have to be less critical of scholarly resources that you find in the library and a lot more critical of websites that you find just by doing a search online, which is the purpose of this workshop, to get you more comfortable with assessing that sort of information. Okay, so let's go back to our website evaluation page, and we'll stick here for a little bit until we start looking at our examples. So let's talk about first and foremost, why should we evaluate websites? Well, to start with, anyone may publish a website, right, on any topic, and there are in fact many hoaxed websites. So one that I wanted to start out today with is something called Feline Reactions to Bearded Men. So let's see if I could pull that up. Because in addition to those hoax websites, there are also websites that are satire or humor sites, which are actually disguised as science. So we really have to be careful. So this is part of the Improbable Research website, and this is a study that was done by these particular authors associated with particular universities, and we have all of the components of a scholarly research study: an abstract, findings of prior investigators, which would be more like a literature review, our materials, our methods, our results, our interpretation, acknowledgement, notes, and a full bibliography. But really, this study is about what cats did when they saw pictures of men in beards. And this is just a humorous website, but it is possible that someone could come across a website like this, and because of the nature of it, because of the way it's organized, assume that it is in fact a scholarly study. So in addition to those outright hoax websites, there are websites like this that we really have to be careful about, right? And I think I just like this one because I love this picture. Okay, so in addition to these issues, or perhaps more importantly, websites have not undergone a review process for inclusion within a collection, whereas the resources in the library's databases have. Many websites are inaccurate, biased, out of date, or not just thorough enough. Now, that's not to say that they're all bad, right? That's what we have to just build our skills at evaluating the types of resources that are valuable. There can be, obviously, very valuable resources that you do find online. And search engines are obviously a way to start. So everyone here has used Google before, but I want to also show you some new examples of some search engines that might be helpful for you in your pursuit of scholarly sites. Search engines are useful for finding topical information from organizations, groups, and personal web pages. Reliable internet resources may include government reports, conference papers, industry and professional standards, scientific papers, and news reports. And there are, in fact, even blog websites which present high-quality posts summarizing academic research. One is called researchblogging.org, and I know for a fact they're doing updates right now, so we're not going to visit that site. But check that out because that can be a helpful source of scholarly information. So we're going to start out with a Google search, but what I want to concentrate on is the Google Advanced Search. So from this page, in order to get to the Google Advanced Search, I don't believe we can get to it from up here. So what we want to do, first of all, there is a way to bookmark the Advanced Search screen, and it is included in your workshop outline. So the electronic version of your outline has a link. But I want to show you, if you just go to regular Google, let's do a search for ethical leadership. And we're using the quotes here, so we search for that as an exact phrase. This works in Google, Google Scholar, and all of the library's databases. And it's the best way to find an exact phrase with no other words in between. If you're not familiar with this, I definitely recommend Searching 101 and Searching 102 workshops. So here's our search for ethical leadership. And what we want to do is go to Settings right here and go to the Advanced Search. Again, you can bookmark this advanced search in your browser. That way you can more easily get to it. We see that our search terms have been retained here. But what I want to point out is that you have a way to limit by site or domain. And we'll talk a little bit more about domain names in a moment. But this is a great way for you to weed out all of those commercial websites, all of the .coms, by just entering a domain of your choosing. So if you only wanted to receive website results that come from .edu websites, you could put that in. If you only wanted .org websites because you're trying to look at some professional organizations, you could do .org. .gov would be another option. Sometimes, depending on your research topic, .mil would be an appropriate domain. So let's go ahead and update our search with the .org, which means that will still include Wikipedia. So I do caution you against using Wikipedia in your academic research. It's always fine for you to consult Wikipedia on your own to get your own background information on a particular topic or issue, but it's not something you want to cite in your academic research. So we limited the site to .org. You can see that at the top of the screen, but that will still include, again, Wikipedia results. But if we start scrolling down, we'll see that all of the domain names are a .org, which just means that it's a higher likelihood that it's a reliable resource because it's not a commercially driven website. So that is a way that you can make Google work to your advantage when you are doing online searches. Another website that we can take a look at is called Yippee. So I'll just type that in. Yippee is a meta search engine that searches across multiple search engines, combines results, and filters out duplicates. Meta search tools then filter results by site or domain, source, and/or time and date. So let's go into Yippee. Again, this is something that you could easily bookmark as well. And I'm going to just search for ethical leadership without quotes in this case. I think when I did it with quotes, it was a little bit too narrow. Okay, so we have the top 366 results that are listed here. What I want to point out to you here is the Sites tab or link right here above your search results. If we click on Sites, this is going to allow us to limit our results to a particular domain, just like we did in Google. So in this case, there are 99 results from .org, 42 from .edu, 16 .net, 7 .gov, 7.ca, and there's a couple others as well. So if we did not want to see those .coms, we could proceed with looking at the .orgs, for example. So this is another way to make the internet work to your advantage without getting overwhelmed by a huge Google search and not knowing what is reliable and what isn't reliable. Of course, we're going to talk about specific criteria for websites as we go along in this workshop, but this is just some tools that you can use initially when selecting your websites. Another website that we can use is called iSeek Education. iSeek Education is a targeted search engine that searches hundreds of thousands of trusted resources from universities, government, and established non-commercial providers. So that's the key there. They are already weeding out any commercial results. So let's go ahead and do a search here. And for here, I'm just going to go with a broader search for leadership. I tried ethical leadership and there weren't very many results. So let's go ahead and press search. On our results screen, when it loads in one moment, we'll see that we can start looking at our 200 results. We also have a definition of leadership that we see up here at the top. What I really want to point out to you all today is that on the left-hand side of the screen, we see that there is a way to limit to iSeek authoritative. What this means is if you click on iSeek Authoritative, it means that all of the results have been reviewed by educators across the various disciplines. So it's a really great way to find authoritative websites or online documents related to your particular topic. The next search engine I would like to go to is Google Scholar. So many of you may have used this already in your academic research. It's another great source for locating scholarly resources online. So your results may include articles, book citations, perhaps dissertations or theses, etc. So Google Scholar is a great source, but I do want to note that it does not mean that all the results are coming from peer-reviewed journals. So just keep that in mind. They will definitely all be scholarly sources, but you might not be finding your peer-reviewed journal articles. Okay, in order to access the Google Scholar Advanced Search, they don't have their own page like regular Google does. They just have this small pop-up right here where this arrow is. So you're going to click on this arrow in order to get the Google Scholar Advanced Search. Now, there is not a way to limit by domain by the .edu.gov because these resources are already scholarly in nature, okay? You're not going to get results for commercial websites. So we could do an exact phrase search here for our topic of the evening, which is ethical leadership. And I don't need the quotes here because it's a specific field for exact phrase. So I'll go ahead and press search. These are our results, over 28,000, which is to be expected. It's Google Scholar. Much like Google, you will get an overwhelming number of results. Pretty much the only way you have to narrow them down is by date on the left-hand side of the screen. But the one other thing that I wanted to show you in terms of Google Scholar is that you can link Google Scholar to the NCU library. So what we're going to do is click on this arrow in the upper right and click on Settings. And by the way, there is an FAQ in the library on how to make this connection with Google Scholar. So if you miss a portion of it, you can always return to that FAQ. We're going to click on Library Links, and then we're going to search for the word North Central. So not NCU, not North Central University, just North Central. And we're going to press Search. Then we're going to check off North Central University full text at NCU, and we'll leave Open WorldCat as is and press Save. So what that does is that returns you to wherever you were in your searching, but it includes links to the resources in the library. So it looks like on this first page, all of the resources were also available open access online. But as you start to look through, here is an example of an article that was not available online, but yet we can access it through the NCU library. So that's another way to make Google Scholar work to your advantage by linking it to the NCU library. That way you don't have to return to the library to search for something that you may have located in Google Scholar. Now keep in mind with the linking, that operates on your browser's cookies. So if you clear your cache and cookies, you use a different browser, you use a different computer, you'll have to add that back in again. Okay? Now the last sort of search engine that I want to cover tonight is called Microsoft Academic. Microsoft Academic was sort of meant to be a sort of competing product to Google Scholar, and it was something that went away temporarily and then came back sort of recently. So we could do the same sort of search here. The interesting thing about Microsoft Academic is that it not only includes links to articles, but it also contains related information about the most relevant authors, institutions, publication outlets, and research areas. And it may include trends, graphs, and maps for your academic research. So let's go ahead and do our exact phrase search for ethical leadership. And I'll go ahead and press search. Okay, our results screen here does show that we have over 4,000 results. So we could certainly start looking through the articles that are relevant to our topic. However, what I do want to point out is on the left-hand side, we have our limiters. So we could limit by a particular author, affiliation, etc. But this is a really great way not only to narrow your results, but just to identify sort of the prominent researchers that are related to the topic of ethical leadership, as well as the most prominent journals which publish research in that area. You'll also see associated conferences down there at the bottom. So now that we've covered a number of search engines that can be used to locate reliable resources online, including government reports, conference papers, professional standards, scientific papers, news reports, etc., now we want to talk about another way to locate this type of information, and that is through what's called academic gateways or open access resources. This is included in your workshop outline as well. Academic gateways are collections of carefully selected authoritative websites sorted into specific scholarly subject areas. So one thing that I want to show you to start out with is under the Research Resources drop-down menu on the library's website, we have a page for open access resources, or a guide for open access resources. And basically, if you come to this guide and click on open access resources on the left, you'll be presented with a number of options, but I wanted to highlight the open access article repositories. So this is where the open access research is coming into play. So this may include scholarly articles or scholarly books or academic books that are made publicly available by particular publishers. These are examples of open access article repositories. Now, in contrast to that, there are those academic gateways, which are collections of websites that have been gathered by professionals, in many cases by librarians who have evaluated the resources. So I wanted to show you an example of those, starting with the NCU Library's subject guides. If we go to the Research Help drop-down menu, we can click on Library Guides. There is a library guide for every specialization within NCU, no matter what school you are within. So just as an example, if you are interested in athletic coaching, we could click on athletic coaching, and then on the left-hand side of the screen, we have all of the resources that have been gathered for this particular specialization: journals, news, reports, books, background information, dissertations, videos. But this is what I wanted to point out here, obviously, since we're doing a website evaluation workshop. These are our carefully curated collections of websites related to these specializations. So this is a good place to find reliable websites that are not typically commercial in nature. So most of the time, these websites are coming from organizational websites, government websites, perhaps military websites, educational websites, etc. Not often will you see commercial websites, but sometimes you may. So take some time to explore our LibGuides or our library guides. If we return to this particular page where all 95 guides are listed, we actually have a way to limit those by subject as well. So if you went to subject and you are in education, you could see a list of all of the education guides. Okay, so that's sort of our first example of those academic gateways. Another one is called the LibGuides community. So let me pull that one up. I know I have that bookmarked. The LibGuides community is a way to search and explore over 500,000 guides created by librarians at libraries worldwide. So the NCU library LibGuides will be in the LibGuides community, but again, you have access to over 4,000 additional institutions. Now, just keep in mind that some of these guides may be course specific to those universities and contain resources not necessarily available from NCU. But just as an example, we'll type in leadership here, or how about let's type in educational leadership, so we get a little bit more specific. Okay, so here we have quite a number of guides on educational leadership. CUNY Lehman College, we can keep scrolling down. Wright State University Leadership Studies in Education and Organizations, University at Buffalo Educational Leadership and Policy. So if we see any of these guides that we're interested in, we can certainly take a look at them. Again, just like I said, they may include resources not available from NCU, but at the same time, you may identify a particular book, journal, article, etc., that gives you a good idea on something that you can use. This particular guide has a tab for associations, so they're listing all of the professional associations that pertain to educational leadership and policy. These would be reliable websites. Okay, anything coming from these particular guides, the LibGuides community, have been created by librarians or library staff members, and they are authoritative sources. They may not necessarily be scholarly peer-reviewed sources, but they should be authoritative sources, meaning that they've been reviewed, they have reliable authors, the content is up to date, it's appropriate for use in academic research, etc. So that was our next example. We looked at the subject guides at NCU and then the larger LibGuides community guides. Another site that we can go to, it's called Oyster. So let me just see if I can pull that up. OAISTER. Okay, this should be it. Oyster is a website that allows searching. Let's see if this works. Okay, perfect. And again, these links are all included in the electronic version of your outline. Oyster is a website that allows searching across thousands of libraries and scholarly websites for open access content. The search results can be limited to downloadable material. So let's go ahead and do a search here for ethical leadership. I will include the quotes there. And so our results, we have about 280. And let's take a look at this first link that says View Online. It may be that it's not accessible to us, but let's take a look. Okay. So it looks like it took us to a record from the University of South Australia. Looks like that may not necessarily be available. Let's see here. I found another link that said to access it. So let's take a look. So this requires library authentication. So in that case, on that Oyster website, what we want to do with our results list is click on downloadable article or downloadable archival material. So that should mean that we're able to access the resources online. So let's give this a try. I actually didn't try these examples, so I'm not quite sure what the outcome will be. Oh, that looks like our same old University of Australia record. We'll try another one. That one, we have a download over here on the left-hand side, so let's give this one a try. Okay, so this one did open up to the full text. So you'll just have to, try your searches and then see if the material is available. Always keep in mind that material that is not found open access online, you can try searching for it within the NCU library. And then if we don't have it, you're always welcome to request that content through interlibrary loan. That is, of course, of no cost to you. And if the resource is available electronically from another university and they're able to loan that out, that typically just takes a couple of days to be delivered to your interlibrary loan account. If you're not familiar with that, we do have a full-length interlibrary loan and alternatives workshop. Okay, the last example that I wanted to show you of an academic gateway is the Social Sciences Research Network. Oops, I did a misspelling, but here we are at the Social Sciences Research Network homepage. This eLibrary provides 754,000 over research papers from many researchers across 30 different disciplines. So we could always do a search here in their search box, or we could go down here and browse by our particular research network. So we could click on leadership to learn more about that. We could subscribe to their e-journals. And let's just go back to our home page and then try a search here. I'll just go ahead and type in leadership. Okay, so now we see our actual results list. We click on one of our results. We'll be able to open the PDF in your browser or download the paper to your own computer. Okay, so all of these examples that we looked at, the Social Sciences Research Network, Oyster, the library guides, the LibGuides community, all of these are examples of sites where the research has been gathered or the websites have been gathered and evaluated prior to putting it in that collection. Okay, so now that we've seen examples of different internet search engines that could be used, perhaps that you weren't familiar with already, and we've seen examples of academic gateways and open access sites, now we can actually start talking about the criteria that we need to consider once we finally select a website for use. And one thing that is located in your workshop outline is a section about domain names. So we mentioned that a little bit earlier when we talked about the Google Advanced screen, and we limited our search to just a .edu or a .org. Domain names are a good starting point when identifying the nature of particular websites. If the website ends in .org, .gov, or .edu, it is more likely to be a scholarly source. Or if it's a .mil, obviously it's going to be a very reliable source regarding military resources. If it ends in .com or a .net, it is less likely to be a scholarly source. One thing to keep in mind here is that many schools allow server space for students and faculty to create their own web pages. And personal .edu web pages made by students may contain some good information, but it would definitely need to be evaluated critically to verify the results. I do have an example of one of those. Okay. Oftentimes, a quick way to tell if you are on someone's personal web page is to look for a tilde, so that little squiggly mark in the URL. So here we see that the website itself is right.edu. So a .edu indicates that it is coming from an educational institution. However, we have this tilde here and we have mills.89. So it's possibly a student's last name that was able to create a website, probably for a web design class. And this one is on Working Dogs. We see a number of images of dogs. We have very brief information about the particular breeds, but this would not be something you would want to use, obviously, in your academic research, because even though it comes from a .edu, it's clearly a personal website and does not contain authoritative information. Just something to think about when considering those domain names. Sometimes you may see a % sign as well. I think I've seen some examples of that in the past. Okay. So the domain name is sort of your first clue, but then there's a number of criteria that we really need to start thinking about. So let's return to our website evaluation page. We sort of summarize that criteria here. Basically, we're going to start thinking about the design of a website, the authority, the currency, the audience, the objectivity, the accuracy, and the coverage. And there are many other websites that talk about evaluating websites, and you may see different criteria listed or just some of that criteria listed, but generally these are the things that we look for. Also under that basic evaluating information page, you'll see some of that included here as well. Currency, authority, accuracy and reliability, audience, and bias. So in our outline, we have objectivity. Here it says bias, but these are generally the things that you're going to look for. And we're going to talk about each one of these individually using an example website. So let's start with design. And let me actually close some of these websites so we're not overwhelmed by the number of tabs, and then we can start looking at example websites. The first one I'm going to go to talk about the design factor is called naturalnews.com. Actually, this is not it. Yes, it is. This is it. Okay. So naturalnews.com, what is the first thing that we see? A pop-up, right? So this is something that you have to X out of, and typically this is something that you only see on a commercial website. And we do see that at the top of the screen that it is a .com. So already we know it's a .com, and we know in terms of the design we're getting some pop-ups, right? Now design is certainly not the most important factor to consider when evaluating a website, but it's a quick and simple way to scan the website. You can look for the overall professional appearance, good organization, nice graphics, correct grammar and spelling, lack of advertisements, and branding consistency throughout the site. So as we look down on the screen, we see a number of, looks like videos on the right, a lot of news and blog posts kind of an overwhelming amount of information, to be honest, as we're going down the screen. It's a little bit overwhelming in terms of the design. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It just means that it may not be your best source. So we can, continue sort of looking through some of these tabs that we see here. If we click on the Science tab, this brings us to a new site, which is science.naturalnews.com. Still commercial, but if we take a look at it, it's much more aesthetically pleasing than the previous website. We don't have all of those busy posts. We have a clear search box. We have ways to browse by category, which is sort of nice. In terms of this website, we're not going to do a full overview, but based on the design alone, I would say, this is sort of conflicting in terms of, how this is going to lead us with that evaluation. We're going to want to look at all the other factors that we're going to talk about today, but in terms of the initial view on the design, you can't really tell in this case because this one looks really nice, almost like a library database. Design was that first piece of criteria. Next, we're going to want to talk about authority. So authority, of course, refers to who authored, published, or owns the website. So let's take a look at the Doctors Medical Library so we can see if we can figure out who's responsible for this content. Okay, so here we are, the Doctors Medical Library. It's a .net. So going by our domain criteria already, we know it could be a little bit iffy. It's not a .org, it's not a .edu. So we might want to be a little bit cautious going forward. But let's talk about the authority. Who owns it? Who publishes it? Is it a personal author? Is it authored by a group such as a company, a school, an organization? What are the author's credentials and education? Has the author been cited by other writings? And typically clicking on About Us or Contact Us is a great way to sort of reveal that type of information. In this website, we see that it looks like Ron Kennedy, MD, is responsible for the information. I like to typically scroll down too to see if there's any additional information at the bottom. It says it's copyrighted by the Doctors Medical Library, so we're not sure yet. We could click on his name possibly to find out a little bit more information. So it gives a little synopsis about this particular doctor, and then it says visit Dr. Kennedy's library. So let's take a look at that. So there's, looks like hundreds, maybe thousands of articles here. So if we wanted to sort of find out more about them, we could try clicking on one of those. It looks like Ron Kennedy is the sole author of this. I'm going to click on Ask Dr. Kennedy. And it looks like you can ask him a question for a $20 contribution. So personally, if it were me, I would probably exit this website right now. Perhaps he is, of an authoritative doctor, but it's clearly commercial in nature, and there are so many other authoritative medical websites. This would not be something that I would want to use in my academic research. This is in stark contrast to Medline Plus, which is an example of a very authoritative medical website, freely available online. If we look at that domain up at the top, it's a .gov, which is wonderful. We want to find out who's responsible. We see NIH and the U.S. National Library of Medicine, as well as down on the bottom, we also see the U.S. National Library of Medicine, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the National Institutes of Health. So we don't even really have to look any further. These are authoritative government organizations that are responsible for this particular content. So no offense to that Dr. Kennedy or whoever that was, but this is what we would want to go with, something like this if we are looking for open access information on medicine. So we looked at design. Speaking of design, this is a very well-designed website as well, in contrast to the previous one. We also want to look at currency, right? We don't want some outdated website that has been hanging around the web but not been updated in several years. So let me look for an example here. This is called World History Compass. It is a .com, which is also a red flag, but I don't want to tell you that every .com across the board is just, you have to write it off. It's possible that there is a .com that is providing reputable resources and information. But let's look at our World History Compass. Typically, to find the date of publication or the last updated date, you will look at the bottom of the website. And we see here that the data on this webpage was last updated on September 22nd, 2001. So why this website still is around, I'm not really sure, but it wouldn't be something that you would want to use in your academic research, even if you somehow had come across one of these particular articles or information that you found on this website. And there we have a not found link. So there's missing links, outdated information. This one links to the Library of Congress, which coincidentally is a really reliable source, but this would not be a good example of a current website. That would be in contrast to something like CNN, any of your major news outlets. NPR.org is a good example that's updated several times a day. So if we click on our news tab, we will start to see our news articles here. And obviously, we have today's date here. So everything here on NPR is super current. And there's plenty of examples where the websites are very current. So we've looked at design, authority, and currency. The next thing we want to really consider is the audience. What is the intended audience for the website? It should be appropriate for university level research. Okay, you don't want to look at a website that's geared towards high school students, that's geared towards middle school students, etc., which you could easily come across when you're doing research online. Just as an example, we are going to go to, let's see here. We're going to go to an FBI website. And this particular FBI website shows the history of the FBI. So here we see a timeline, tells us when the FBI was started. This is interactive, so we could click on a particular date range and go to those major events within that FBI history. So this is probably a really good way to get an overview of the history of the FBI. But if you haven't noticed already that in our URL, we have fun games, kids history, and we have back to the kids page. So this particular website, while it is on the FBI.gov website, this is aimed towards children. It's always fine to read it for your own knowledge, but you wouldn't want to cite it in your academic research. Versus you could try clicking visit the FBI history page. We'll see here that the kids in the URL has been removed, and instead we're just at fbi.gov/history. So we know it's reliable, it's a .gov website. Now we know we're not dealing with the children aspect. This would be appropriately geared toward either a layman or a professional or a scholar in our case. Objectivity is the next thing that we need to consider. Does the author present fact-based information, or does he or she have an agenda? So just as an example, let's quickly go to the Institute for Historical Review. So this sounds like a very authentic organization. It is a .org. We could go to the About section to read a little bit about them. They actually have an introductory video here. They're an independent educational center and publisher that works to promote peace, understanding justice through greater public awareness of the past, and especially socially, politically relevant aspects of modern history. So it sounds like a really good website. However, the Institute for Historical Review in actuality is the world's leading Holocaust denial or revisionist organization. So you can find that out by doing a Google search, and you can read about them and their actual agenda. Other things that websites which have an obvious bias may include, they may have persuasive language by the use of emotion-arousing words. They may have a lot of repetition. They may have things like exclamation points because they're trying to get their point across. So watch out for bias or being unobjective in the website. Accuracy is the next thing that you really want to concentrate on. So let's look at an example here. And we're going to take a look at a website called White Poison, and it's referring to milk. So this website talks about the horrors of milk. The pus, blood, antibiotics, and carcinogens in milk are causing all of these conditions: autoimmune disorders, fatigue, anemia, asthma, and they do use emotion-arousing words. The horrors of milk, white poison, these are strong, strong words. So it's possible that there's a little bit of bias going on here, but we also would need to check the accuracy of facts presented. So as we scroll down in this article, we're going to see a lot of claims that have been done in this article regarding milk or dairy and health conditions. I want to show you how you would fact check something like this. So we would want to return to the library's website and go to our Roadrunner search. I'm going to click on Advanced Search. So in our article on white poison, we learned that consumption of milk and dairy leads to prostate cancer. We want to check that using scholarly research studies in the NCU library. So here's an example of what you could do. You could do a nested search for milk or dairy. The article mentions milk, but we'll throw dairy in there as well, the larger group. And we'll do an exact phrase search for prostate cancer. So we have our exact phrase there, and let's put our scholarly and peer-reviewed journal limiter on and press search. And let's see if we get any scholarly articles. We could look at this article, Relationship Between Milk Consumption and Prostate Cancer, a short review. This one's several years old, but we can always sort our results by date and try to find something more recent. This one down here is from March 2015. But this is how you would go about fact-checking something that you find in an online source that you kind of, aren't necessarily sure about because they don't provide any references, okay? And if you ever have a question about fact-checking something, always feel free to contact the library. Now, the final evaluation criteria is the coverage. And I don't have an example for that because that's basically just how well does the website cover a particular topic or add to the body of knowledge. Is it cover it well, or is it just very sparse information that really isn't doing you any good? That's something to think about. So just again to recap, that criteria was design, authority, currency, audience, objectivity, accuracy, and finally coverage. Now, the decision to use a particular website will be based upon your comprehensive evaluation using that criteria. Keep in mind, however, that websites will almost certainly be strong in some areas and weak in other areas. It's also important to consider your particular information needs. A website that may be fine for obtaining general psychology information may not be right for a psychology PhD thesis. Finally, don't underestimate your gut reaction to a particular website. And if you still have doubts about the credibility of a website, speak to your professor or feel free to contact the library for further assistance. Maybe we can help you fact check something. Now, the more you practice your website evaluation, the easier it will become and the better you will get. So we've listed a number of examples within your workshop outline under the section that says practice. Following practice, there are some additional resources listed in that workshop outline, basically other guides from other universities and scholarly publishers that provide information on website evaluation. And finally, just as a reminder, there is the website evaluation activity. Completing the brief activity will give you practice evaluating websites and will demonstrate your new library skills. So you can get to that by going to the workshop outlines. And down here at the bottom, we have the website evaluation workshop outline, which will contain all of the links that we discussed, and the website evaluation workshop activity. If you do not have any questions tonight, certainly feel free to take off, and I really hope that this workshop was helpful. And I hope to see you in future workshops as well. If you think of anything else, certainly feel free to follow up with the library. We have the live chat, we have the Ask a Librarian. We're certainly happy to assist you.